another question that might help people kind of see behind the curtain a little bit is, what am I benefiting from feeling stressed about this or feeling frustrated or irritated about it? How am I benefiting from that emotion? Right? It could be like, sometimes for me, it could be, well, if I'm frustrated about it, I get my way more often. It seems to be like, maybe that's, I get to win or I get to be right. Another one could be that I get to avoid having to make a decision, right? I can just be frustrated and stressed about it. And I'm just like, nothing ever happens. I just can't, right? So asking ourselves, am I getting any benefit for feeling this? And I ask my coaching clients this, especially for something that's repetitive and it seems to be a pattern of some sort, and they just can't. I've tried all the things and nothing works, and I've done all the classes and I haven't gotten. So I usually ask, well, is there a benefit to you not doing this action or not getting the results from fulfillment?
Hey, it's Deepa, and today's guest is Valerie Hope. Valerie's work activates global leaders to come alive. For more than 20 years, she has dedicated her career to supporting leaders worldwide to foster consciousness, connection, and creativity by exploring their subconscious beliefs, thoughts, and behaviors. Her transformational coaching leads clients to greater fulfillment, better collaboration, more trusting relationships, and a sense of aliveness. Valerie is a native Spanish speaker from Panama. Her playfulness shines on the tennis court, improv stage, and in her community choir. At the very beginning of our conversation, Valerie shares a personal experience and the tools that she used to work through it in real time. Tools such as understanding emotional dysregulation, naming our feelings and emotions in the moment, having empathy and curiosity instead of judgment, and owning our emotion as a way of introspection. As a coach, she also speaks about various strategies in small and big ways in which we can make changes in our life through actionable steps. Here's Valerie Hope. Hi, Valerie. It's so good to have you on my podcast. And as always, it's so good to see you.
Thank you. It's nice to be seen. It's always great to spend time with you.
I'm so glad we hung out last week. Was it last week in Dallas?
Yes, it was just last week in Dallas. It was a memorable outing. Lots of deep conversation, light conversation too. I'm glad you were here. I'm glad that we got to meet in person. It's been a while since we've seen each other.
Absolutely. I'm going to be in Dallas and not reach out to you. That sounds kind of crazy to me. So yes, every time I'm there, I'm knocking on your door. I'm like, Patrick.
There you go.
But anyway, let's just dive in because, you and I have been talking about all of these things. Tell my audience a little bit about yourself. Who is Valerie and what does she do and what makes her come alive?
Wow. I mean, those are so many things. I will tell them what you want me to talk to about.
Stop it. Don't do that.
Don't do that part. Well, I think a few things that people should know about me. You've already told one. I live in Dallas, Texas, right? I've been living here since 2001. So it's been quite a while. I'm originally from the Republic of Panama, and my family immigrated to the United States when I was 9 years old because my dad joined the army. And so we moved around quite a bit. So this is not where I would say I'm from, but it's where I call home because this is where my stuff is. My stuff is usually where my home is. That's pretty basic. And then as far as the work, you and I know each other because we're both leadership coaches and studied with UC Berkeley, the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute. So that's my profession. That's the career. I have my own business as a leadership coach. And I'm a professional speaker. So I'm hired to either facilitate workshops, sessions, conversations, or deliver keynotes in different organizations. That's like the vocational stuff that I do.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Also, by the way, you did remind me last week that you were from originally Dallas, not from the outside Dallas areas, which are like Frisco and stuff.
Dallas is a Dallas zip code, and the city is Dallas. It's not like some other random outside suburb of Dallas.
Yes. I was cracking up when you said that to me, and I was telling that to my cousins there. They were like, whatever.
Only people in Collin County and Dallas County would know and understand what we're talking about. It's all right.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're really, Dallas. I love it. So tell me something. What are some of the things in the last year, or even if you look at post-COVID, in terms of key speaking notes? I'm just curious, what are some of the topics or workshops that you've done in the last year?
Oh, well, in the last year or post-COVID?
Either way.
Well, I'll say that a couple big topics have come up that seem to be, let's say, fan favorites, so to speak.
Fan favorites, yes. Yeah.
One is there's this idea of bringing joy, equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion really started to rise. The volume and temperature started to rise. It's been up, but it just kind of spiked, right? The fever spiked back in 2020 after the death of George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mm-hmm. in very meaningful ways, and in ways in which I think woke up some people to, hey, this is something that we don't just resolve through passing certain laws. It's also something that we need to look at in our organization and how we relate to people that we live nearby, right? And so I developed a keynote focused on how to have those conversations, but bringing a sense of joy to them, how to bring joy to life in DE&I, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that was a keynote that I thought, wow, what could I contribute to this conversation, right? And it wasn't all about like, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean? And why is it important? It was like, okay, there are people and organizations that are managing that stuff. And it was actually quite hard for me to like land on what is it that I wanted to do, because I didn't want it to seem that I was being cavalier, like, oh, let's have fun, let's just be play. I didn't want it to come off that way. I really wanted this to be a really well thought and compassionate look at how to bring a level of meaning and depth and wisdom and lightness to a topic that a lot of people that I was listening to and surrounded by seemed shy about, or very insecure about how to have conversations that were meaningful around diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was a big one. It was a transformation for me to find my path to do that, have that conversation and have that particular talk, but also in bringing it to organizations that they could actually use to work with, or at least provide a frame with, that they could use to look through, as they were going through all their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. That was a big one.
Which is very critical to the work that we've been doing the last few years. But I'm curious, because one of the things you said, shy and insecurity, but what I mostly see underlying all of that, and I'm sure you do too, is fear around having these really difficult, awkward conversations. Fear of saying, am I going to say the wrong thing? Because I don't mean it intentionally, but I'm concerned about the impact. Mm-hmm. So what are like one or two things that you did to sort of like really deliver that, listen, how does one have fearless conversations around DEI?
See, it's not about being fearless necessarily, right? But it's about being conscious, like being really conscious about what is coming up for you. So there's a lovely anecdote my dad shared with me, because he was in the military for 27 years, right? That was his career. And he said they used to play this game called push ball, right? Where they have this ball that was like 6 feet in diameter. So it's huge, and it weighed like 50 pounds. And the way they would play, this is part of their physical fitness, is that they would have this field, like the size of, imagine a soccer field or a football field, with goals on either end of the field. They would split the group into two, and they would basically take this big old 50-pound, 6-foot in diameter ball and push it to one end or the other, right? And the teams would try to get the ball into the other team's goal. And he said, and the game was fun. They always had a lot of fun playing because it was a game, and it wasn't just like marching up a hill or something, right? It brought a sense of entertainment and play. But he said it was hard because this big old ball, and you're trying to push it, and the other team is pushing it back as equally hard. And people sometimes would get trampled. The ball would roll over them. It's like 50 pounds rolling over you, right?
Oh my
But he
God.
said if they coordinated well, the team members could get underneath the ball, right? Our whole team would get underneath the ball and lift it all together and push it over the heads of the opposing team. And the ball would move faster and it would be lighter and they could make more ground. And so I use that as like the metaphor for these conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We could use that big old heavy ball and, oh my gosh, and trying to push it one way or push it the other way. And people are like stuck and no one wants to hurt anybody. So we'll be real gentle with it and ginger. But really, is there a way to lift the ball? Is there a way to get underneath it so that it brings a little bit more lightness to the conversation?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so basically what I shared with part of it is bringing a sense of consciousness first. And we're like, okay, how do I really feel about this topic? What is it that's making me uncomfortable about it? Or what is it that I'm really excited about? Or what is it that I want to accomplish? Right. And then curiosity. We also talked about really basing it off of curiosity. Like, could you ask a question rather than make an assumption? Okay, so rather than making some kind of judgment or assumption, what the human brain likes to do very readily, is easy, is fast, is quick, doesn't take a lot of energy to do so, right? But it can get us in big trouble. So is there a question that you can ask instead? Right. And then ultimately, how do you now then establish a connection with that person? How do you have a meaningful conversation? Like, small example of that is I was on a flight. This was a couple of years now. But I was on the airplane. I was sitting in the middle seat. It's one of those Southwest Airlines, everybody, by the time you're in like group B12, you're already in the middle seat anyways. So I got to, first few rows, I found a middle seat where I knew like, okay, you know what? I'm going to pick that one. So I did. And there's a woman next to the window and she was kind of curled into the window with a little pillow and blanket and everything. And so I was like, oh, she place, in my mind as I'm getting settled, tired, etc. So I'm getting settled in the seat and finding my seatbelt and everything. And at one point I brushed up against her when I went to reach for the seatbelt. And she like just yanked herself even further to the window. And I was just like, oh, excuse me, that was unnecessary. And it was a little bit hurtful because my mind went automatically to some judgment about, well, is it because of my skin color? Is it because of my size? Is it like, what is it about having brushed up against her that had her react this way? Right. So the flight goes off. We were off in the air and she's still curled in the ball. And after I just kind of decided I'm not going to pay any attention, she's clearly tired or whatever, and maybe just was annoyed in the moment or whatever. So I start doing something else. So at one point she gets out, she wants to get out to use the restroom. So the middle seat, me and the person in the aisle have to get up, let her out. So when she comes back, she gets back into this curled position. And I was just curious because I'm just like, who is this person? And why did they react that way? I'm still part of it. It was like because she reacted to me. And I just kind of would take like glances out of the side of my eye at her. And at one point I noticed her kind of wipe her cheek like this.
Oh.
And I was like, that is the universal sign for I'm crying. Right? And I was like, huh. So I waited a few beats and then I just leaned over gently and I said, are you okay? Do you need anything? And she was, no, I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you. So she's wiping her face. And I just, was just there kind of holding space in a way, not looking at her, not saying anything more, but I was just kind of, hey, I'm projecting. I'm here. I'm available to talk if you want to. And eventually she said, oh, I just buried my mom yesterday. And that moment opened up this lovely conversation about her mother and the relationship and her siblings and how they were processing everything. And we talked about death and we talked about life. And I mean, I think it was a 2.5 hour flight. And from that moment that we established that connection, the conversation just blossomed and it was so powerful and it was so lovely. And, if people are guessing, she's she's Caucasian and she's an older woman. And so, right, people are like, well, what was that big a deal? That was that moment. And not that that in itself had anything to do with it, but the assumptions that we sometimes make when people react in ways that are unexpected or unfamiliar to us. And again, in my case, that moment of judgment that was then that could have clouded over anything, right? I would just have this whole perception about everything she did or said from that point. Once that judgment is set. And so part of this is all about how to bring that curiosity and then always know that I need to establish a connection. Granted, there are some people, very rare, there are individuals that you're just like, you know what, that they might have that perception themselves, right? They might have some judgments or some prejudice or some, right, all that in their background. And you know what, that's not for me to necessarily.
It's theirs. It's not, yes.
It's theirs. It doesn't belong to me. But what I can do is I'm always asking myself, okay, how can I lift the ball in this situation? How do I lift that ball? How do I make this lighter? How do I get curious? How do I get underneath it? And curiosity is usually the lever that I use.
Oh my God. You brought me back to a moment. I wish I had Valerie sitting next to me.
At the plane?
I was 5 months pregnant and I was heading to bury my mom. So it just, wow. Like I haven't even thought about it in years, but I'm so glad, she had you sitting next to you. Now, let me ask you something. The shift between that slight moment where, you brushed up against her and she curled in some more into herself and then you had this thought in your head to curiosity. That's where I feel like most people stay and they don't go to curiosity because they're in their own head telling the story about and then going so much deep into judgment. How do we make that shift? Like, how do we get somebody to start thinking about how do we make that shift from that assumption, my own story in my head, judgment to curiosity? Because I'm imagining there's a bit of dysregulation that happens in that moment. Like your emotional dysregulation, you're heightened or maybe triggered, right? And how do you shift, right?
Oh, Deepa, so much to say about this. All right, regulation. So I've done a lot of work. I'll just start with that. I've done a lot of work on myself, on how to just pause a beat. Like I said, my dad was in the military 27 years. So you can make some conclusions about what growing up with a parent that's in the military might be like. There's a lot of, get things done and, being very assertive and independent. And right, there was a limit to how much self-indulgent emotion we could experience, right? Shortcut for like, why are you crying? There's nothing to cry about. I'll give you something to cry about. There's all that stuff growing up.
Oh God.
I have three brothers. I'm the only girl. And so also this heightened level of very masculine energy in my home. And then I had a mother who was a school teacher, who was also very structured and so part of it was growing up, I already had kind of a level of just don't worry about other people. Just focus on what you need to do, get stuff done. So I don't get too thrown off when things happen. I'm not like, oh my gosh, oh dare you. I wouldn't be snarky or anything like that. So I think part of it is just understanding we all have a childhood. We all had a background. Like just get really present to what that has and how that has informed us and how that has programmed us. Right. So I'm grateful for that because it's helped me to accomplish a lot of wonderful things and not get too thrown off or impacted so negatively by other people. To that extent. But that Valerie that grew up that way would probably not have been curious enough to ask someone a question or have even paid attention to the person that might be crying. That Valerie would have been like, she's shutting this down, focusing on where I'm going in my book or whatever, right? And so the evolution really is more about how to then understand and honor my own emotions, how to give voice to them. Growing up, that wasn't something that I was very fluent with. It wasn't something we talked about emotions at home very much. And so over time, I had to figure out ways to do that. And some of it came from wonderful mentors and coaches and therapy, and I'm going to give credit to my ex-husband actually was great. Argentinian, very expressive, emotional, was very judgmental about that for a good long time. Hence, we're not married again anymore. But he was my greatest teacher. He's the one that started to crack open that, emotion actually serves a purpose, a mode of expression that I can embrace. And so part of this, to share with you in that regulation is just to notice it and be able to honor it. And if we can't honor it for whatever reason, because we were not programmed that way, or we don't have the tools, then go get the tools. Right? Sometimes, it's kind of like playing a video game. We can't go to the next level until we've gathered all the right components in order to achieve that. So you're stuck at whatever that level is. If that level is, I'm going to shut this person off and just focus on me, then that's what it is, until we have a desire to see more or see beyond or make a difference. Right? If we're up to more things, if we want to expand ourselves, if we want to go to the next level, it's going to require us to expand ourselves. And I was always interested in moving to the next level. I wasn't interested in just staying in this one small Valerie box, right? And so that's, I think, number one. Number one is you gotta want to expand beyond who we are right now. And in any conversation that we're having, in any situation in our life, I think that's number one.
And that means expand who we are right now, means like really kind of do a lot of introspection. And one of the key things that you said was honor. You kind of learned over the years through your experience to, if you wanted to grow and just get out of that old Valerie kind of mindset, right? You said honor my emotions and then voice my emotions. So in that moment, if I'm kind of thinking of people who get triggered or who get stuck in their story, one of the ways to sort of unstuck ourselves and possibly regulate our own emotion before we jump into somebody else's, right, is to almost say, wow, like what is really happening with me? Let me take a deep breath. What is the story that I'm telling in my own head? And let me just validate my own emotion, but also, is there truth to what I'm feeling, or am I just making an assumption?
I would add to what you were saying and say it's about owning our emotions, right? There's a sense of responsibility. I remember you and I have talked about nonviolent communication before, and I've taken a couple of workshops locally. And one of the things that I remember, they gave us a list of emotions that were like pseudo emotions, things like I don't know. Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank right now, but they're emotions that were basically like low key judgments about other people. I was left out. I feel left out, right? Or I feel betrayed, or I feel like these emotions that are actually not owning our emotion is actually casting blame on someone else, right? You know what I mean? So if I'm owning the emotion, it would be, I feel hurt. I feel sad. I feel angry or frustrated. Anyway, so I think it's not just about an honoring of the emotion, I think, but just owning them. Like, what is my responsibility in how I feel right now? Regardless of what the other person has said or done, however I'm perceiving it to be, right? What is mine? And because not everybody reacts the same way to the same stimulus, right? And we don't act the same way to the same stimulus from different people. So I'm like, and it can't be just a truth that anytime somebody does this, sometimes someone cuts me off in the highway and I'm just like, I'm singing my song and I'm happy and I'm like oblivious. And other times I'm in a rush, I'm trying to get somewhere and somebody cuts me off and I'm like, oh my gosh, how dare you? Right? So my job is now I have to own what it is that I'm experiencing and what I'm feeling. And so that's the distinction I want to make between honoring and owning. Owning is mine. It's something that I generating. I have a perception, and it's all with my story and my history and my wiring and my programming. That's what's kicking off.
And I think that's such a valid point, because it kind of brings us back to more introspection than like projecting and focusing on somebody else's behavior and emotion. And it says to us, listen, just go inner and see why this is bothering you, why this is bugging you, because we only have control over our own emotions and what we can do. The more we regulate ourselves, the more we are able to be and present in a conversation with the things that we all value about and speak about, which is empathy, which is listening, and all of those things. They don't even come into play if we are completely dysregulated and pointing a finger at the other person, right? Because we're so focused on someone else's behavior. So I really love owning my emotion as a way to do some introspection.
Absolutely. That's it. That's the path. And I think even when it comes to these very difficult, challenging topics that people might be insecure about, right, bringing it back to that diversity, equity, inclusion piece is really understanding, like, okay, what is it about this that that feels uncomfortable to me, or that feels, I feel uncertain about. Like being able to explore that with oneself first before we try to start managing and fixing or addressing other things is really helpful.
Yeah. And particularly to DEI conversations, one of the key things that I want kind of to put it out there to our listeners is that I think whenever we feel this level of discomfort, or we feel like some anger, or we feel frustration, or we feel self-defense, I think those are like key moments to just kind of step away from it rather than engaging and do that owning my emotion, like looking at why this is coming, and truly just in our own heads, understanding it before we also possibly could be, oh my God, I had this conversation yesterday. I felt all of this. But then now that I've thought about it, I can go back and say, listen, I want to just bring this up and have a conversation around this. And this is what was coming up for me yesterday.
Totally. In fact, another story about a plane.
I love all your plane stories. You and I need to get on a plane, but anyway.
Well, this one, I was in a different airline, and this one had like a first class area, and then it had coach, right? And I was sitting in coach, but I was like within the first 3-4 rows after the first class section. I was, I'm one of those people that often falls asleep before the plane even takes off. And so at some point in time, I remember seeing people walking once the plane was up in the air, going to the restrooms from the section, the first 5 rows or so after first class, going up to the front to the restroom and then coming back to their seat. Right? I saw that at some point, just back in the mind register. Right. So then I doze off at some point, and when I wake up, it's after they started the beverage service and whatever. And I wake up and I notice that the little curtain was closed between first and coach. Doesn't mean anything to me. I was like, but I decided I was going to get up and use the restroom, and rather than walking 2/3 of the plane in the back, I'm just going to go up to the front third of the plane, right? So I'm going up to the front, and as soon as I get to the section where I move the curtain to start crossing over, the flight attendant in that section says, "I'm sorry, ma'am, you can't use these restrooms." And I was like, "Oh, well, I'm sorry. I'm sitting right here in these first few rows." And she's like, "No, your bathrooms are back there." And she says it in a tone that was very strict and
rude. Yeah.
Judgment was rude, right? But I was just like, very strict, very, very matter of fact. There was no "Oh, hi, sorry, no, we changed." And I was just waking up from a nap. So I didn't have the brain power completely there to say, well, I just saw a couple of people that went through this bathroom. But she said it, and she said it in such a way and that I was embarrassed. Right. But at the time, I didn't realize it. I just remember reacting. I felt like somebody just slapped me in the face. Like, how dumb that you even think that you'd come up and use these bathrooms or something like that. And so when she said that, I was in shock, and I didn't have any really important retort because I wasn't in my best thinking. And so I literally turned around and I go back, but I saw there were people in the back bathroom. So I didn't want to go wait in line. They usually tell you not to. So I went back to my seat, but I noticed I was breathing like this, and I felt my face getting really hot. And I was like, I'm so upset. Oh my gosh, what did that mean? How dare she talk to me like that? And in my head, all this judgment, right? And really, because I've done some of this work and I'm a meditator and stuff, I just took a few breaths. I'm like, oh my gosh, my breath is like really a short breath, and I'm short of breath, and my face, everything feels so hot, and my stomach is tight. So sometimes when we don't have the words or the consciousness to articulate an emotion, sometimes just noticing how our body reacts is really helpful.
Physiological, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was just like, oh, I'm embarrassed. That's what I was embarrassed because the way that she addressed me in front of all of these other people. And, I'm sure people looked and was like, or whatever they were thinking. I was just embarrassed about that interaction. I thought it could have been done in a more empathetic way. I was half asleep. So part of me was also a little bit more sensitive to what the interaction. I'm like, did I miss something? Did they make an announcement about not going to this bathroom? And maybe I'm wrong. And they've been, I don't know, right? All this stuff. So finally, when I get to the restroom, I go to the back and I'm there for a few moments. And in my head, I was just like, gosh, I wish they had made an announcement if they changed the policy, if people are not supposed to cross the window, the little curtain. And sure enough, I'm there like 5 seconds when I hear, ladies and gentlemen, please, if you're sitting in rows, blah, 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 your restroom, please direct go to the back of the plane, the restroom in the front. They made the whole announcement. And I was just like, I feel like God was speaking to them at that point. I was like in my head. But it was just such a fascinating example of how to own my emotions. I'm like, okay, first I was just going to be like, argh. But I'm that person that goes off on people or gets angry that way. I will internalize it first. But internalizing, rather than just help it boil and boil and boil, I was like, why am I boiling? Whew. Okay, breathe, breathe, breathe. By the time I got up, went to the restroom, I was processing. I'm like, okay, I'm embarrassed. That's why I was feeling that way. Da, 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 da. And then clear-headed, they made the announcement, fine. And so then I did reach out to the airline afterwards, and I wrote a message saying, hey, this happened on the plane. Be consistent with your policy. There's such a thing as a policy that's like this. If that's the thing, make sure everybody's honoring it. And then number 2, if somebody does not, for some reason, in this case, if somebody makes a mistake or whatever, just to make sure that flight attendants, can address it in a more compassionate way. That wasn't necessary. I wasn't aggressive. I wasn't, I thought very respectful in how I went into that experience. And I don't think that it felt that I was receiving the same level of respect.
First of all, thank you for sharing that, because I would absolutely feel what you were feeling in that moment. I'd be like, oh my God, this is kind of embarrassing, or did I not hear something? But and I'm sure a lot of people experience this not only on the plane and other areas. So just kind of to think about what is it that people can do in that context or in that situation is like a couple of things, like based on what you're saying. One is just like really honor your emotions. Just take deep breaths, like let it pass over, like your physiological emotions that you're feeling, whether it's like palpitations or discomfort in your stomach, like just breathe through it and get it under control to a point where you feel regulated, right? Then after that, own your emotions. Like think about what is coming up for you, like what is going on, and actually name them. I'm embarrassed, or I'm humiliated, or like that was awkward, that was weird, that was unnecessary, right?
Yeah.
And the third part of it almost feels like, well, that's really not mine, because then you were validated when you went to use the restroom at the back for them to make the announcement. They hadn't made that. So, and then post that, whether they made it or not, or it's a different context, and come back to it and say, it's really not mine. This is not something that I should feel embarrassed about, because it's really not mine. And I really wish that she had more empathy in what she said. And God knows what's going on with that air hostess, whatever she's having to deal with, right? So bring in that little bit of empathy, not only for myself, but for that other person.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
And then let it go. And actually, an actionable item after that, in your case, is actually email the airlines in the most respectful way and say, hey, this could have been handled slightly differently.
Exactly.
Right? Right?
Yep.
So I feel like those like 4 steps, if any of us did that in any situation, we'd feel more grounded to handle a situation that doesn't feel comfortable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know we moved into this, the DEI space, but I'll have to say that even wanting to dabble into that space was a moment of, okay, I need to own some emotions here. Right? I need to be curious about some things, because I remember reaching a couple of organizations reached out and asked if I did this type of work. They knew that I was a facilitator and a coach. And so when they reached out, they shared with me, here's some of the challenges we're experiencing in our company and some problems. And we'd like for someone to come in and do some work with us. And it was interesting because the moment I heard the request, I was like, in my mind, I said, that's not a facilitator job. That's the job of a leader. Like, why would you hire somebody to come and do that? Right. Basically, there were some challenges with the team, especially around all the things that were happening after George Floyd's murder and the protests. And there were all sorts of dynamics in the workplace that became very sensitive and very charged. And people didn't think that the organization was doing enough. And the organization was like, what else are we supposed to do? So they set up a DEI committee, as many organizations seem to have done at that time, to start putting together all sorts of resources and activities for the employees. And so when I was engaging with the team, with the organization, they basically said, oh, yeah, we have this DEI committee. And they thought it would be great to have a speaker or to have someone come in and facilitate some things, because it doesn't seem that people are still satisfied with what we're doing. There still seems to be some things. And I said, okay, well, what have you done? And so she shared all the things that they've done and the Google Drive that was set up with all the resources and the meetings and some of the tone in the meetings. And I said, well, when did this happen? And when did you set up the DI committee? I'm like, oh, the DI committee, we set it up right away after we started hearing some of this feedback from the team. And I said, so how are the resources for the DI committee? How are they being used? Are people enjoying them? Are they helpful? And they're like, oh, we don't know. I'm not sure. I haven't checked. Like, well, that could be a very good first step. Is see, are those relevant, right? Have you checked in with people? How are they feeling now? They were feeling upset. You set up the committee. You don't know if people are using it. Have you checked with the people again? Are they still feeling upset? Are they still feeling unsettled? Are they still feeling, what? No, they had no conversations. And I was like, you don't need a facilitator. I didn't say it quite so bluntly as I'm saying it to you. But it was like, actually, I think the best step to do, and this became more of a coaching conversation for the leader with me, said, I know it would be easier to bring in, like, outsource having this hard, uncomfortable conversation. I might be able to lift the ball and all kinds of cool things, although I hadn't even come up with it at that time. But the idea is, now you as a leader, what could you say? What would you ask your team? How would you check to see if the resources are sufficient or relevant? Right. So then the conversation started to focus more on what they could do. And so it helped shift some things. But that scenario happened to me a couple of times where people reached out asking me to do something that I really thought, actually, this is the job of a leader. It's not something you hire somebody, outsourced to do this. And because of that, I started to question. I'm like, well, maybe there's something that I can do to support people. But I knew that the DE&I space, the diversity, equity, and inclusion space there's so many people who are so wonderfully equipped and committed to work on specifically that area. I knew that wasn't my expertise, and it's not something that I wanted to be an expert about. But I knew that there was some wiggle room in having the conversations with leaders who needed to then follow up on the work that they've been invested in for DEI, to start to utilize it in ways that are more in alignment with their values in the company. So I remember reaching out to a mentor, and I was just like, I don't know, like, is that something I should do? And I don't feel like I can have the same level of integrity that I do with other things. It's not my company's called Connected Joy, and I feel like, this feels heavy to me, and it feels, I feel uncomfortable with it and awkward and And so I was honoring my emotions and noticing that, oh my gosh, I don't feel as comfortable as I do with other areas of my work. And as I had this conversation, she really validated for me. She's like, well, your perspective is valid. You come from a different country. You're a woman of color. You're a certain age. You have all these other elements about you that might help, right? That helps connect with a lot of different types of people. And you can do it any way you want. I was like, really? I don't have to do it the way other people are doing it? Yeah, novel. But yeah, started to get curious. I'm like, so what do I want? What's important to me in this message? What's the message that I want to bring? What is the level of coaching that I want to give? Which is why programs like the ones you and I have participated in, coaching for inclusion, that's more like, yeah, now I can see what I can bring to this conversation, right? That's more in alignment with who I am and what I have to contribute. So this not only works with emotional regulation, but sometimes as we're trying to find our footing in the world and what we have to contribute and the work that we do and how to bring more lightness and lifting the ball in these areas, that can be applied in so many ways.
Yeah, no. And I think this brings me to my next question, the coaching, the expertise, that aliveness, that what brings us joy and where do we want to be impactful and how do we figure that out? I want to just circle back to a conversation that you and I had in person in Dallas, and we did a thing where you introduced me to Psych K. Did I get it right?
That's it. Yes.
And you said this is something that you use very consistently in your coaching practice. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I feel like it's connected to all the work that you and I do, and which might be useful for people to know that there's a tool such as Psyche that they can sort of, kind of explore.
Absolutely. Yes. So I'm certified as, so I went through the basic course, I went through an advanced course, a master course, and a health and well-being course, all focused on using this tool Psyche, which essentially supports understanding if our subconscious mind has any reservations or there's any interference with what we want to do consciously. So, for example, when somebody, and this happened in my coaching clients, somebody says, "Oh my gosh, I get so nervous when I have to speak in front of a group, or I get really anxious and I lose my words," and right. So that's a real thing. There's a fear of public speaking for some people. For some people, it's stage fright. For some people, right? All of that. But they have taken all the courses. They know all the tips and tricks, right? They usually start off by asking something like, they'll ask me, "Can you tell me some tricks or some tips that I can use whenever I speak to an audience? And what do you do? How do you do it?" But so I asked them, as a good coach does, tell me what you know so far. And they'll list all the things. Oh, get a good night's sleep, or make sure I'm prepared, or, bullet points on a note card. Like, they'll talk about all sorts of really wonderful tips. And I said, is it possible that it's not really tips that you need, but there's some subconscious message that you're feeding yourself that about the experience of speaking in front of the group that's getting in the way? And it's generally, I've not really thought about it. So Psyche, this technique, supports people in understanding if your subconscious is protecting us. In many cases, that's what our subconscious will protect us from something, but it's usually some old programming, right? There's some idea, belief, thought that we had when we were young. Something happened to us and it was such a negative experience that now we take, oh, no, we can't do that because remember that one time, right? So our subconscious does that. But our conscious mind wants to be effective and brave and, right, communicative. And so I use that technique whenever I hear somebody that has already done some things, but they're not getting the results that they want, or it seems to be moving a lot slower, or they seem to procrastinate or contradict themselves. Like, I want to do this and I'm doing all the things, but I don't seem to be getting the fulfillment or the results. And that's what that technique provides them, some clarity on how to then release and disconnect, right, those subconscious beliefs or ideas, so that you can at least be neutral with that and build on it, build something much more empowering.
Gosh, I love the example of, I'm scared of, public speaking, because I get that a lot. And sometimes even, I'm just going to be very vulnerable. This whole podcast thing was like a huge learning curve for me, because just being on video, that was just like so much of that was coming up, like, oh my God, I have to sound nice all the time, or what if I say something stupid, and then
Which
what
is
if
a
I don't know
stretch.
what I'm
I
talking
know.
about?
So hard. Sounding nice. Ugh, the worst.
You know what I mean? And it sometimes it's just practice, but that practice can be brutal, because then if the practice makes perfect, people say, right? But if it's just not giving you what you need in terms of getting ahead of the learning curve, then a tool like this, right? Because you're doing the practice, you're not getting where you really want to be, right? And a
Yep.
tool like this definitely will help. So what are some of the questions you ask, or what is the method of doing this too? Like,
Yeah.
let's just take the example of, I'm petrified of, or I'm not comfortable in public speaking.
Public speaking. So in order to use the technique, in order to be able to facilitate a session, that's what we call it. In order to facilitate a session where you use PsychK, you have to be certified. So I'm not qualified to teach people how to use PsychK in this setting. I know how to facilitate sessions doing it, right? So that's number one. But a couple of places that you could start to see where there might be some dissonance between your conscious mind and your subconscious mind. So, for example, if there's stress, right? Whenever I feel stressed about something, I notice that my stress will drive how positive I feel about trying something new, right? Or how willing I am to look at different ways to approach something. I shared this example with you, but my boyfriend and I were not agreeing on where to go to dinner one night. And it was just like, oh my gosh, it was so irritating and frustrating for me. And again, owning my emotions, right? We finally found a place and everything. But I remember thinking, I don't want to have to go through this every time we have a disagreement about some place to go to eat. It was just so draining. So I can actually use this technique with myself too. And a couple of things that I start to notice is, okay, how am I feeling about what's happening? Is there some kind of stress involved? I don't even have to know consciously that there's stress. I can feel it in my body, right? The physiological response to all of that. I also, there's another question that might help people kind of see behind the curtain a little bit is, what am I benefiting from feeling stressed about this or feeling frustrated or irritated about it? How am I benefiting from that emotion? Right? It could be like, sometimes for me, it could be, well, if I'm frustrated about it, I get my way more often. It seems to be like, maybe I get to win or I get to be right. Another one could be that I get to avoid having to make a decision, right? I can just be frustrated and stressed about it. And I'm just like, nothing ever happens. I just can't, right? So asking ourselves, am I getting any benefit from feeling this? And I ask my coaching clients this, especially for something that's repetitive and it seems to be a pattern of some sort, and they just can't. I've tried all the things and nothing works, and I've done all the classes and I haven't gotten. So I usually ask, well, is there a benefit to you not doing this action or not getting the results of fulfillment? And I tell them before I ask the question, I always ask, look, can I just be challenging in this moment? But I'm not being ironic. I'm not being sarcastic. There was absolutely no judgment with me asking this question. And they're like, okay. And then they go, is there benefit? No, I'm much more gentle. Is there benefit? Is there something that you might be getting out of? And that is such an eye-opening question, because then we start to really explore, because we don't want to lose the benefit. Case in point, there was somebody who, it happened in one of our certification courses. She's like, oh my gosh, I want to be in a long-term relationship. It's been so long. She's been divorced. Her kids are all grown. And she's like, I'm ready to go back out there, but I don't want to lose my independence. I've built up so much, and I have my business and I have my life and I have my friends and all. I don't want to lose all of that. And so while consciously she's saying, I want this long-term relationship, subconsciously her mind was just like, no, you don't. Because if you do, you're not going to be able to do all the things that you like doing. You might have to move. You might have to lose some of your friends. Like all these things that her subconscious was protecting her from. And so what we then do in those cases is we start to focus on using the technique to, how do you get the gains without losing the benefit, right? How do you still take the actions and not lose the benefit? So
Ooh.
to be in a relationship, but also maintain your autonomy.
Have your independence. Yes.
Yes. So we help tease those apart so that people can really figure out, oh, actually I want both. Because otherwise it feels like an either or. I can either have a relationship or I can keep my independence. And like, no, life is much more than that. We just always, when we're under stress about something, we don't see the possibilities.
And so this is more like the feeling and the intellectual piece to me, which completely makes sense, because now we're like really pulling apart what's really going on at our subconscious level, right?
Yeah.
What we're not wanting to see, what we're wanting to avoid, what we're not wanting to deal with because it's discomfort, it's hard, right? All of those things. Now, once we've kind of understood that, like, let's say I've understood, oh my God, this is like why I'm not getting where I want to get with this.
Yeah.
What's the next step after that? Like, how do we then apply it into real life?
Yeah. So again, unless you're certified and facilitated, this is not something that I can share. These are the steps and this is why. But what we want to essentially do, that what the technique allows, is to bring a whole brain approach, right? A whole brain approach means that both left and right hemispheres are engaged rather than battling against each other. Both subconscious and conscious mind are also working together rather than working against each other, right? So the idea is to bring a whole brain approach where you now can see a clear panorama. It doesn't change the environment, doesn't change the circumstances that you're dealing with, doesn't change the goal, doesn't change any of that. What it changes is the mindset that we now have. We now can see either more clearly or with more peace and more detachment and be able to make more choices, right?
Yes, yes. And I feel like the reason I specifically wanted to bring this up is that I feel like that's just something, if people knew about it, could go to their coach and could be like, hey, is this something that you do? Or look for a coach who has like certified, who's a Psych K. Because I feel like a lot of people, and you and I've seen this, like we have some amazing coaches, they do all the work, but there's just that small level of like, right? That yes. I feel like they can't jump over or cross over, right? And this tool feels to me like the key to make that crossover and to get to the other side.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's helped me tons. I've grown and experienced a lot. When my family is open to it, they're not always open to me coaching them. You know how that is.
Really? You don't say.
And look, and not to make any medical claims, but I've had a couple of people with whom I facilitated the technique, and they were making a big decision. In one case, one was trying to make a decision of whether or not she should have a hip replacement, and decided all of a sudden, because it was, there was pain involved and there was discomfort, and family was saying one thing, and medicine, the doctors were saying another thing, and was kind of caught in this, in this thought storm about the possibility of having this surgery. And so when we use the technique, it actually, again, to detach some of that, the conscious and subconscious noise and dissonance, to finally get a bit more clarity and some detachment. And so she was able to make a decision that was much more in alignment with her. And she said, I've been struggling with this decision for 6 months. Oh my gosh. And now I saw it so clearly. I'm going to make this decision. And she did. And she now has to do all the things that she has to deal with. But ultimately, it was just having the clarity. So it didn't change the diagnosis. It didn't change her family's concern or her doctor's opinions. But what helped her is just that, okay, now I have clarity. Right. And with my mom, I've had some similar experiences where, because of some, she was having some palpitations at some point, and she was getting anxious about it. Whenever it would happen, it would create even more stress, and it would exacerbate all of this concern about it. So we did the technique, and she's like, I have them, but now I know exactly what to do. The doctor has told me, and I have the appointments, and I'm able to talk about it without the fear and the stress stress is not it's not a coping mechanism. It's an information tool. It's just like, hey, pay attention to this. You want to do something about it, right?
Yeah. Don't ignore it.
Yeah. Don't stay in stress. Stress is just giving information about there's something to work on here. There's something I need you to pay attention to, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I know that, okay, maybe this could be helpful. if you didn't feel so much stress, and you can make a decision that was in alignment with your highest values or your greatest, desire.
Yeah, and this reminds me, of, generally, even when I was doing therapy, and a lot of questions would come around, medical conversations, because therapy encompasses pretty much everything, right? And one of the key things was doctors would always tell us, like, give us, like, say, hey, make a calculated risk. Like, you have to make a decision. These are the risks. And even in the surgeries that can be highly successful, there's a possibility that 1% or 0.1% or whatever it is could go wrong. And I feel like this tool will allow us to get the clarity that you're talking about, in case in point with your client with the hip replacement, to be like, wow, I get it. Nothing changes, but I feel more clear in making a decision and moving forward.
Coaching does that too, right? Even sometimes having conversations with people, we just like, oh, I never said that out loud. I didn't realize that I was thinking this way, right? Sometimes it's that kind of revelation, but this usually works at that kind of belief, that thought level, that part of that programming that we sometimes get from our communities, from our families, from living life at a certain in a certain culture. We sometimes have these very unconscious thoughts and beliefs about things, and they can sometimes get in the way of what we actually want to accomplish.
Yeah. And separating those and really owning them and honoring them is the key to, and having that physiological sort of like intentional response to it is the key to making decisions. That's great. That's great.
I add to that, actually. One thing, a technique that I think would be helpful, another one that you can start looking at, is oftentimes when someone is unhappy about something that's happening, or stressed or frustrated, right? It's happened. Just this week, I've had at least 2-3 clients who came up with all sorts of things they were frustrated about. And, I don't like this, and I don't like that, and I wish that person would do this, and I can't believe my team once again. Right? So what I do is have them write down all their frustrations or all the things that are not working. Okay, just write them down, just bullet point lists, right? And they write, I give them some time to write, no talking, just write it all down. And then we talk a little bit about, what did you write in your list? And sometimes, because we're not just like recycling the same thoughts over and over, and you see them in black and white, it helps. Oh, wow, I didn't realize this was also bothering me, and this was bothering me. That. So we do that, have a conversation. And then I say, okay, now what do you want instead? And this is classic psyche conversation at first, right? To ask, so what do you want instead? Because what we also input into the subconscious mind is the state that we want, not what we don't want. Subconscious can grasp onto the yes, or the we can do this, versus the I don't want something. And even that exercise can be really reaffirming, because when they start looking at their list and flipping it to, oh, actually this, I don't want people to complain, and, I want people to be proactive, right? And they have now a whole different relationship with not only the words that they use, but also the way in which they're coming at a problem. Rather than avoiding all this stuff or trying to fix all this stuff, they can, I can amplify all these other things. This is what I want. And when I ask my clients, I'm like, do people know that this frustrates you? They're like, no, I don't think I've told anybody. Okay. Do people know this is what you want instead? Like, no, I haven't told anybody. I'm like, well, there you go. Have fun.
because more than beyond even telling anybody, it almost feels like this gives them more clarity. Like they're looking at all the irrational beliefs and thoughts that they're having. And once they put it down and they kind of change that into more rational beliefs and thoughts, then that's a behavior shift. But importantly, also, it feels like there's like a level of awareness that we not constantly need to have, that these things are going on in our head. And how do we shift that from rational to irrational, and then have the wherewithal to actually say something to somebody in that moment?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And I think And I feel like doing this every day is a habit that we can totally like sort of build and work
Yeah.
towards. It's not something that's going to happen right away, but it's just something that we need to consistently make it an everyday process in our life.
100%. And I'll send you some information. Maybe you can put it in your show notes about Psych-K, and people want to get certified. There's a level of certification like basic where you learn to do it just so you do it with yourself. You don't necessarily have to go through the higher levels to facilitate for others, but it's a fantastic tool just to have as an option. Oh my gosh, I'm feeling stressed, or I'm feeling disappointed, or hey, there's this thing that I can't really get over the hump about. And there's a tool that you can now use to support you.
Great. Thank you so much. We will take those and put it in the show notes. I have one question for you. Earlier, before we started, you said, you have this 3Cs concept that's on your website. And then you said you have a new one, which is called OMG. I'm like, I want to know all about OMG. Tell me.
Yes, that was not part of the research. But actually, funny enough, I've talked about that in, quite a bit. And OMG basically is the acronym that stands for Own, Master, and Give Away, right? Own, Master, and Give Away. And the first time that I used it or shared it openly is actually in my TEDx talk. At the very end, maybe the last 30 minutes, like right? In the last not 30 seconds, the last 30 seconds of my TEDx, I happened to mention this as kind of like a wrap up of all the things that I'd shared up to that point. And I'm like, our job is to own our talents, our gifts, to master them, and then to give them away, right? To make that contribution. And it sticks. It's so sticky. And people are like, oh my gosh, I like that. So that's a very common response to it. And I was wondering, like, what? I mean, it's such a duh. Like, why wouldn't people do this? But as I've been, owning it more and more, I've started to realize, okay, actually, this is a very complete way of communicating what I need to owning. So now thinking about the emotional piece, right? Owning our emotion. That's one thing I work with a lot of leaders. Usually start off by understanding, like, what is it? How are you feeling about this? What is it that you're thinking? What are your opinions about this thing that you want to accomplish, or why that challenge exists for you, right? So owning emotion is usually the area I explore. Make it conscious, in other words. And then we move into like master. And I usually, in this case, talk about mastering something, whether it's mastering your talents, it could be mastering connection with other people, like mastering something. All right. So what is it that you need to now learn to do or stop doing in order to address this emotional response or opinions that you're having, this thing that you're now more conscious about, right? So like we used the example earlier of this leader that I had make a list of all the things that were frustrating to him and the things that he wanted instead. All right, cool. So now what? Right. And in this particular case, it was like, actually, I need to have a conversation with my team in order to address some of this stuff, because they're not aware that this means this much to me and this is what I actually want. And so we moved into the mastery part. Like, all right, now you have to master connection. So what is it that your team needs to hear, and how would they need you to say it to them? And who would you start with? Would you do it at a team meeting? Would you have your colleague start with that, right? Your second in command? Well, is that the person that needs to know this first? And then we talk about how they can bring that into that particular relationship in a way that honors the relationship, honors what they've known in the past, et cetera, right? And then the last part, the G, is about give it away. As it relates to your talents or skills, is find a way to contribute them in ways that are meaningful to not only you because you like or you appreciate or you have a passion for, but also because there's a need, right? There's a need for it. And in this case is, he had to get really clear about like, so what's important about your team? What's important about this organization that you work for? What is it that you care about? Do you care about this list of to-dos and tasks? Is that really what you're aiming for? You're like, no, actually what I want is for us to really focus on efficiency. I really value excellence. I value being a go-to for our organization. Like, all right, cool. So now you got to figure out when you want to give it away, right? You got to find who's the best recipient for all this work you're doing with your team. Who can they now serve? Because they now have a consciousness, right? They have owned, hey, this is what we need to do as a group. This is what works, what doesn't work. These are the places and the people that are going to be responsible for executing it. And now we have to figure out strategically, who do we give it to next?
Goodness, OMG.
OMG. So many uses for that.
So many uses for that. So just to sort of play back, it's not only owning our talents. It feels to me that it's about upskilling. It's about owning our skills. It's about learning. That feels like being consciously aware and making an effort to put some thought into what is it that we own or want to learn, right? And then mastering it, spending some time actually working on it and being intentional about it. And then finally giving it away, figuring out a way to actually make a contribution around it or help somebody or speak to it.
Yes.
Right?
100%.
And this, I feel like this is something that anybody, like I'm almost thinking when people kind of ask me this question, I don't know if you get this often, is what would I need coaching for, right? And then we would, being a coach, you'd say, what do you think you need coaching for? But I almost feel like this could be like a pre-work for somebody, like before coming into coaching. Not even looking at mastering or giving it away, but just like thinking about the O piece of it. Like, what is it? What is my talent, or what brings me joy, or what do I need to work on?
And the thing with coaching is that it can work at any level, right? So if owning it, if the thing is, I don't know why this is happening or why this isn't happening for me. I'm not getting the promotion that I want, or I don't know why I was laid off again, or I don't know why I'm not connecting with my team. Like there's some level of I don't know. That's usually the owning piece. Okay, let's figure out what it is that's at the source here. Like what's the root cause of what's happening or not happening? Right? That's all the symptoms. Let's get to the root. Okay. So own is all that. So if they don't have any clue, it's a good place to start. If they already have a clue, I've always been told the last time I did 360, I got the same feedback every time. Right? There's always somebody knows.
Wait, what's up with this voice that you're bringing up?
I take improv classes, Deepa. Did you know that? I take improv. So of course I got to bring a character to every.
Wait. Being that we're part of Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute, that totally makes sense.
My voice has come alive.
Oh my God. We can go to so many places from here, Valerie. But anyway, coming back to your point.
Coming back to the point. And so once, if the person has a clue, right? I've been told, I've had this feedback all my life. I've been hearing the same thing, right? Okay, so maybe the owning part is not as predominant. That's not the key, right? So now so now what have you done about it? Or what haven't you done? What haven't you tried? So then we work on the mastery. So what is it that you need to learn? What is it that you need to apply? What is it that you need to have develop an expertise in order to now either change how your approach, change your perspective, right? You have to now do something different. And so that mastery piece comes in right there. And then the G, give it away, is now you have to be like, okay, so who's my target? Like, where am I aiming this? I've been now aware and I've owned all these, taking responsibility for the things that I need to work on and what's getting in my way. I've mastered some skills and approach of how I can actually do something about it. And now where do I begin? Right? The G is like, where do I start? And the coaching, right? Sometimes we have to work with let's just find out what's going on. That's not that the things aren't working the way you want to. Or then we have to okay, well, what are the skills that you need? And maybe the skill doesn't come from a coaching session. Maybe the skill comes from, you know what? I need to sign up for that one course that I saw online, or I need to actually go get some practice and maybe work with somebody one-on-one on this until I get it better. Get better at it.
I was thinking this tool can be used as a way to have a very robust coaching conversation. And also the giveaway piece is, I feel like it's more the accountability piece. It's the small steps piece. It's the baby steps that we do in coaching, where we just don't have these grand old conversations and we're not saying bye. We're saying, listen, what's the accountability piece here? And then that could be that piece that takes them to the next level.
100%. Do you remember, I don't know if you're able to talk much about this, but you had a coaching experience where someone, you gave me permission to share this story. So I'll just tee it up and then you can finish it up. The gentleman who at one point was like, no, my job here is to just get my work done. But because all the stuff that was happening around Asian hate became so prevalent, where he had an experience of his own that he then started to tell his colleagues, his coworkers who were also mainly Asian descent, how to handle it. You remember this?
Oh, one of my most favorite clients. Absolutely. I remember
Yeah.
this.
Excellent. And so I used that example as giving away, and it's also not even just giving it away, like finding a strategic place to target, to put our strengths and energy, but also to give from the heart, that we actually do something that is meaningful, not just because it has to be done as part of my job, is my the expectation of my team. No, we actually have to do the hard work to identify, okay, what do I care about? How can I put whatever I do and make sure I give from my heart, that there's heart and meaning into it. There's something purposeful about it. And I love that story because it went against how he'd identified himself as the type of leader he was. But because it was so heart-led, it was like, I have to do something, and I have to do it in a way that's going to be helpful to people, right? He gave from his heart in that moment. And that's why I also love that coaching can support people in figuring out, how do you make this meaningful? Not just do it to check it off the list. How to do it in a way that's really that fills you, that makes you come alive.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that client, one of my favorite clients, and so inspirational. Through his own experience, he chose to not go in the negative way and be disheartened or sad or by it, and experienced all of those things, but rose above it in a way to be inspiring within his own community and inspire others to do something about it, right? Rose above it to say, I need to do, this is a pivotal moment in my life, and I can choose to not do anything about it and just put it away in a corner, or I can do something so profound and meaningful that would actually have impact not only on me, but my family and the community.
Yeah.
Yes. To just circle back to your original, when we started talking about it, I think this is a piece where when you look at DI conversations or difficult conversations or hard conversations, this is a choice that we all get to make, but we need to do the work around it to make these kind of choices. These just don't come easy. They're not but this is the work, whether you're going to therapy, whether you're going to coaching, whether you're self-learning, whatever it is, right? We can only make these shifts and changes when we put the work in it to do it.
100%. 100%. In fact, it's so funny as we're having this conversation, this OMG thing has been, for me, it was just like, I came up with that concept and a Toastmaster speech that I had to give some random Wednesday afternoon, right? to fulfill my Toastmaster requirement. And I didn't know that it would take a life of its own. And even after this conversation, I'm like, oh, actually, I want to use this more as a diagnostic tool or a self-diagnostic tool for people. And so thank you. Thank you for that, because I think you also now, I'm going to have to change my website. Thank you, Deepa. The power of this podcast, everybody, is that you will come away a transformed being. That's the power of this podcast. Recipes for life. You heard it here.
Sorry, I'm laughing so hard. My cheeks are hurting. Well, blast it on your website, because I'm going to start doing this as pre-work. When people reach out to me, not even even signing a contract, I'm like,
oh, you have to give me credit for it, because I said it first. It's recorded. It's recorded. There's witnesses.
Fine, you'll get the credit. Fine. But anyway, it's such a joy to always chat with you. I feel like we just come away with so many things. As I'm winding down, I have one final question for you, Miss Valerie. What is your recipe for life for 2024?
Man, 2024, I don't think it's going to change.
I was you're thinking, oh my God, she's going to tell me something profound. And she goes, it's not going to change.
OMG is going to be at the root of all of it. Like I said, you have changed my life in this conversation. We talked about this idea of coming alive, right? And I did a speaking engagement yesterday with a group of Latinas in human resources. And we had this conversation about aliveness. And I talked about, remember that in the New York Times, there is this author, Sean Kelly, who wrote an article. And he talked about aliveness, but from the perspective of two different people. One was the Latin lover Casanova, who was, kind of the playboy and left a trail of broken hearts, but likely ended up alone, right? Disconnected after that kind of experience. But he was all about pursuing his passion and being spontaneous. And that was a big part of aliveness for him. And then in this article, it also contrasted the approach of this German philosopher whose name is Immanuel Kant, right? And Immanuel Kant was all about obligation and duty, and you find meaning in the things that your daily routine. And so we all have a, bias against one or the other, but, the idea is that this daily routine provides you with that guidepost. But unfortunately, sometimes it really, you don't get access to inspiration, right? You can't just be like, find an opportunity then and go for it because, oh no, here's my routine. And so we might have a preference, or we lean one or towards one or the other. But I think aliveness is really at its best a combination of both, right? And that's why I think being able to own our emotions, being able to see what is it that we feel about something could be is good data. It's just great data to have. If we want to be fact finders, right? We like to find facts about all kinds of stuff, but we don't always take the time to find facts about ourselves. You're like, how do I feel about this? Why do I feel this way? Right? How do I own those emotions? Right? And that part of that aliveness, finding that passion, or like, oh, I'm bored, or maybe I'm lacking passion. I need some of that. But then the mastery and the giving it away is really about the duty and obligation, right? Now I have a duty to learn more, to practice more, to be more skillful. And I need to give from the heart in a way that's meaningful, right? That there's a level of duty and obligation that's going to be fulfilled, not only for others, but also for myself. Right. And so I think, one of the things that I find really empowering is to always look through those lenses for my own life. I don't teach or coach anything that I don't believe in. Everything that I said to you today, Deepa, you've known me for a while. I live this stuff, right? I don't always live it perfectly. I obviously still have things to learn and to master, right? I still have moments that I need to own some things, right? But overall, everything I've shared is something that I absolutely live by. And I'm finding as I get older and wiser that I'm Valerie's 5.1 right now. And I know in myself that, what? This year is going to be continuation. I need to continue to. Is there anything else that I'm not owning? Is there something else that I need to be more to honor within myself, or about the relationships that I have, or the environment that I'm in, or the choices I'm making in my profession and my career? Right? Is there something else I need to master? I told you I was taking improv classes. I mean, I love doing things to help challenge me because I want to expand myself. I want to be able to be more available to people. And I know in order to unlock that next level, I need to do more things, right? I can't expect to get better results if I'm not willing to unlock my own skill set, right? So that's part of it. And then giving from the heart. I've said no to several things this year, things that I'm like, you know what? No, I don't want to do this anymore. Or, yeah, that's not something that I think is going to be fulfilling. I can see the need, right? There's a duty, there's an obligation, there's a, hey, Valerie, you have the skill, you should, you could. But I also know that, it wouldn't be from the heart. It would be from a sense of guilt. And that's not, I know at this point in my life, that's not going to be sustainable for me, nor would they be getting the best from me. And so there are projects that I turn down. There are people and organizations that I've chosen not to work with. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. I can't give you my heart. I don't say it's not that dramatic.
I want to bring some Bollywood, like, oh no, to this. Okay. Exactly. Honestly, you've inspired me to go and take some improv classes, which I'm going to get on it.
You would be amazing at it. You would have so much fun. When we don't take ourselves so seriously. In fact, I feel like I'm like the oldest person in my improv class right now. But I also feel like I don't care as much. Again, 5.1 does that to me. So I'm just kind of like, I go in there and I don't kick myself, or, I messed up, or that didn't come off the way I thought it would. But it's like, I know that on the back end, right? Mastery sometimes requires a few stumbles. On the back end, I'm going to be able to be more present with people, more spontaneous, more giving, more courageous because of those experiences. So I'm like, cool. It's a win-win. I don't have to worry about that. So I think you would absolutely.
Yeah, because we're constantly we want to learn, we want to get excited about learning new things, about doing new things, and bringing that into our work, and in turn not only bringing joy to others but bringing joy to ourselves.
Yes, 100%.
Right. And part of that, I feel like, is the big thing which you mentioned, which I'm doing thanks to my producer Corey, which I have to give him credit, is the yes and no list. And I have a no list now, and I look at that no list because it creates such great boundaries for me. Like, it's not in my head, it's an actual list that I go back and look at it. So as a last question, I'm really curious, what's on your no list for this year?
I don't think I have a list per se, but I do. I'm the way I'm wired is I have a very physiological response to yeses and nos. I noticed that. I'm owning that now more so than I used to before. I noticed there's like, ooh, tell me more. That sounds interesting. I want to, maybe I don't have all the resources and all the skills, but if I'm like, oh, yeah, that's not, I wonder if I start thinking of ideas and I'm curious, if I have a reaction to a request, that's usually that's a good sign that this is a yes for me. Right. Even if maybe I'm not the best fit, but it gives me an idea that I can then use in the other way. Cool.
Yeah.
But in the no's, I generally will be less, maybe there's a little bit of a, I have to kind of talk myself into it. Like, well, if I did, I wonder, there's not maybe the level of interest or curiosity or excitement
and
or even
joy. Yeah.
yeah. But I did, the group I met with last night, I said, I know joy can be a kind of high bar for folks, right? Joy is like, oh my God, right? And it's not necessary to have that level of joy be the indicator. It's not likely that you go, oh my gosh, I found this thing on sale. Oh my God, joy. No, it's probably not going to be like that. But my tell. In fact, I have I listened to if you ever Google anything, Abraham Hicks is a wonderful.
How do you spell the last name?
Hicks, Hicks. Abraham Hicks.
Gotcha.
Is without getting into the whole background, but essentially is very wise. There's a speaker that talks about all these levels of wisdom, and this kind of more in the spiritual realm. But they have an emotional scale. They came up with this emotional scale form. And what I loved about it is that it distinguishes, let's say joy, happiness, love. That's like the highest level we can aspire to emotionally. And one of the lower ends of the spectrum there would be like guilt, shame, fear, right? Like that. And then there's a scale. So there's a spectrum of emotion. And so I noticed that the midpoint of that, like the turning point, the lowest of the high of the positive, would be like contentment, right? Just like, fine, things are fine. It's nice. And so when I feel that something is fine, is nice, I could eventually get curious or interested as I learn more, I explore more. So if I have that feeling, I'm like, that's nice, interesting, okay, then that could be a maybe for me. It's a maybe. I need to learn more. But when I'm feeling like, okay, I can already feel emotionally, energetically, mentally, it doesn't feel good to me, doesn't sound good to me, or I'm not that interested. That's usually maybe it's not a quick no, but it could be let me think about it. I'll get back to you. No.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
No.
I feel like we both have talked about two different ways of having a yes or no list, or being able to say no, the ability to say no. One is to be thoughtful about it, maybe have a coaching session where you create one, where you put down a whole list and it's easier for you. And the other one that you mentioned is just like, which has gotten me even more curious. And I'm like, now I want to practice this, is just physiologically, what is my body telling me when I'm hearing this? Like, where is my energy coming from? How am I feeling about it in my body, which is a huge indicator to what's going on here, because they both work in tandem. for our listeners, I feel like these are like some great tools, including your OMG, Psyche, and everything that you bring into it. And if not anything else, just go take an improv class. Valerie, as always, thank you so much for just bringing so much joy into our conversation. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you, to be with you. It just, just brings me joy.
Good. Well, you make it easy.
That kind of joy.
Yes. Oh my gosh,
Exactly.
But I think you make it very easy, right? Because there's an affinity, obviously, for the two of us to work together and talk with each other like this. But I also wanted to say that is not always the case with everybody. Not everyone that I meet necessarily, and I'm sure people that are listening, not everybody that they meet or connect to either. But I will say that this is one area of my life where I've chosen to be disciplined. I bring resilience and discipline into this conversation about joy. I think we spend way too much, in my opinion, spend too much time and energy being disciplined and resilient about stuff that we don't want. That's below the line. And I know that there are things that we have to do. There's things that you have to, paying taxes, right? My dad always says, the only thing you have to do is pay taxes and die, right? So my dad does not talk like that, but just for effect.
I want him to watch this. I want you to send this podcast to him and see what he says.
My mom probably more upset about the heart palpitation revelation than anything else. So there's that. But the paying taxes, for example, it seems like a small thing. Okay, you have to do it. But when I actually got to the point where, because there were, I had to pay a lot of taxes one year, more than I was prepared to. And it, ouch, hurt. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. So I had that initial reaction. But when I started thinking about, well, what do paying taxes enable? What does it enable for me? What does it enable for my community? What does it enable for this state, for this country? And I started to reframe that was just an opportunity for me to, in the OMG, it was the G. It was like, can I give from the heart? Can I give taxes from the heart? Can I find a way to do this in a way that's constructive and empowering to me? That is not always like a take. I believe in abundance and prosperity. So that's where my discipline and resilience goes now. That, okay, I have to do this. I have to do it, but I got to do it with a willing heart. What do I need to do? What do I need to own? What do I need to master in order to give away from my heart? So that's the discipline that I want to leave people with. That's why connecting to joy is so important to me. Inherently, there's a lot of hard things to do in life, right? There are things that are difficult. There are challenges. There are things that are out of our control if you don't choose. But can we bring the rigor to being joyful? Like we do the rigor to doing hard things. I'm like, nah, I don't want to do it with the hard things. I want to do it because there's a sense of like, I can lift the ball. So I'm going to work on my legs, work on my arms. So I can lift the ball and make it so that the discipline and resilience that I have are to keep the ball in the air.
Yeah.
Not to get other people.
Oh, gosh. Like you, totally. That, love everything here. Here's your drop your make moment. So we've talked about so many things. You've given us so many tools. But if there was one thing, it was this one thing that you would want to teach someone, if you had only one shot, what would it be for our listeners? What would be the one thing that you'd want to teach someone or have someone take away? One thing.
From everything that we've said so far?
Or your own expertise, insight, wisdom.
Yeah, what I just said at the end, I think is that, we take so much pride in doing hard things and being resilient and hardworking and overcoming and discipline. Those are conversations you hear, especially in leadership, quite a lot, right? And they kind of become a badge of honor. And what I would offer is that, could we bring that same level of rigor, discipline, and resilience to feeling good? Not feeling good because the temporary sugar high of something that helps us avoid our problems or, banter over, Zoom or whatever. No, so that we feel that there's always a way to, okay, I need to keep I got to stay above the line. What do I need to do in order to stay above the line? But do it from a place of authenticity, not because we want to cover up something. Right. So sometimes it means you have to dig up the thing, right? Oh, that.
Do the work. We have,
oh, I didn't think of this. I got to take care of that. Got to take care of
Oh my
that.
God. Valerie, every time I do this, I'm going to have that, oh my God, look at this
Oh,
moment.
OMG. Not my OMG, but that OMG, right?
So,
Yeah.
what you're saying is to bring rigor to joy, to do the work.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. To do the work, to do the hard work of dealing with whatever's coming up for us, looking at stress, paying attention to the things that are bogging us down, working through them, working really intentionally, whether it's like one small piece a day or it's a week, just doing all of that in order for us to uplift ourselves and to feel like good from the inside, just not do something superficially.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll go back to the example of that frustration I had with my boyfriend. We're trying to find something to eat, right? So I use the Psych-K technique. Then it doesn't bring instant joy to do it. That's not why I do it. But I did it so I could at least remove all the stressful thoughts that I had associated to that event, to that discussion, to that irritation, to the point where I was just neutral enough, right? The level of contentment. Okay, that happened. I don't want to feel that way anymore. Okay. What do I need to do? And I made a list. I ended up making a list of all the places that he and I both like to go eat, where both of us enjoy the food, we've both had good experiences. And so I get the level of variety that I want, and he gets the level of certainty that he needs. And now we're like, hey, you want to go out? Sure. Let's go to the list. What can we choose from this list? Right. And so that's what I'm talking about. But it required a level of discipline to get to that, rather than always just making him wrong or me being upset or me trying to get my way.
Yeah.
Like that's unhelpful.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm all about like, how do I make my life more peaceful and more meaningful at this point in my life?
You say, how do I make my life meaningful and peaceful, which is absolutely true and valid. I want to acknowledge that. But I also want to acknowledge that in this context, in this moment that you used it with your boyfriend, it was also about how important this relationship is to you. And
100%.
what are some of the things that you're going to do to maintain that, to keep it alive, to keep it going, to have less stress around it? It's your commitment to your relationship that in turn brings joy for both of you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely important. It's important for me and all the relationship that I have. And I think with him, I have more practice, right? I get to practice over these, like, oh, is that how you wash the dishes? Or, oh, is that what
Oh gosh, I feel like in terms of relationships and stuff, you and I can have a whole nother conversation around this. But Valerie, yeah, thank you so much. As always, you're just incredible.
Thank you, Deepa. I know this is an opportunity for you to also give from the heart, to give us a platform to share what we're up to and what we care about. So I so appreciate the work that you and your team are doing to bring these voices out in the world and give people easy, accessible ways to make their life even better, for them to come alive, right, through these recipes. So thank you for that.
Hey, this is Deepa again. I hope you really enjoyed my show today. Thank you so much for listening to our conversation. If you'd love to get in touch with me or my guest, or would like the show notes, resources, or links, please reach out to me on my website. I would also love your feedback. Until next time.